So people often think the sign of being a good rugby team or a good team in general is that ability to win close games, grind out those victories, show mental fortitude and make winning a habit. Although I'm here to say I think I disagree. I think the data doesn't necessarily support that. Um, because winning one score games actually there's a bit of luck involved. We're told quite early on when we play rugby that the rugby ball does funny things when it bounces. Not everything is in our control, and that's why we don't always win the one-score games, and the better team don't always win rugby matches. But there are indicators of long-term sustained success other than the ability to win one-score games. And one of those things is being able to beat teams by quite a lot of points. Beat teams comprehensively. And it's been shown in a lot of sports that points difference is actually a good way of showing how good a team is. Because wins sometimes are volatile. Sometimes a team wins more games than it should, and sometimes a team loses more games than it should. So it is winning games by a lot of points that actually matters more. Because winning close games and winning one-score games is actually just a bit of a crapshoot. And we're going to go into it now with some bit of data and some very dodgy graphs that I've made in Excel. So I've looked at the last 3 Premiership seasons, including this one, and compiled a bit of data. So the graph you can see is league points per game on an axis with points difference per game. So I've plotted all those, and you can see there's quite a clear linear correlation. And the thing is, the correlation between league points per game and points difference per game is actually 0.91, or sometimes it's called an R value, and that's incredibly strong. So we can actually see, here's a sort of very rough straight line drawn through it. There was a clear correlation there. There's a strong relationship between the two, and it does kind of make sense that a team that can consistently beat teams by a lot of points would be able to win games more consistently. We compare the percentage of one-score games won compared to league points per game. This graph is a lot more messy. And you'd be very, very hard pressed to draw any sort of straight line through that just by looking at it. And there is a correlation of 0.19, but considering these two facts aren't mutually exclusive, that winning a one-score game directly leads to league points, you would think it would have some stronger correlation there, but it really doesn't. And I think it's probably quite a good tool or a good indicator to show what teams can regress and what teams have been overperforming. And that's why I've got these 2 data points circled in the little yellow circles around them. And these 2 seasons both belong to Newcastle. One of them is their 17-18 season, and one of them is their 18-19 season. So on the far right there, that is their 2017-2018 season, where they came 4th in the league. And what you can see is they won 100% of their one-score games, which, you can look at as being incredibly impressive. But when there's no other team that got even close to the 100%, most are sort of between 40 and 60, it is a clear outlier on that graph. And they came 4th despite having a points difference of minus 51. And to get into the top 4 with a negative points difference is very rare. I think the team to do it, there's probably only been 2 teams in the last 10 years that have done it, which is them and Leicester. It's not a very common occurrence. And that's why I've circled their 18-19 season as well, which is where they dropped back to only winning 40% of their games and they got relegated. It's not sustainable to keep winning these one-score games. It's just one of those things that you can't do consistently. And although they did get worse as a team, I think they probably had a lot of aging guys, and their points difference actually rose to minus 146. So they were a worse team, probably being more likely to lose those one-score games. It is still an interesting indicator of how a team can regress. And I think it's also very interesting to point out that Exeter and Saracens, the two premier teams in the Premiership over the years. Exeter have topped the table in every single one of these seasons. They're top this year, and they've topped the table in the last 2 seasons. They've played 25 one-score games, and they've only won 13 of them and lost 12. As Saracens, who were the champions the 2 previous years, and still on points, I think would be third this year, and have come second in the table the 2 previous years, they've played 15 one-score games and only won 6 of them. So the 2 best teams are basically at 50% or worse at winning these one-score games. And they're still the best teams there are. So I've looked at the sort of results from this season, looking at one-score games and how often teams have won and how often teams have lost. And as a bit of fun, I've essentially seen what the table would look like if you changed the results of every one-score game. And some teams do quite well out of it, and some teams do very badly. So I guess probably the biggest winner is Gloucester, because you can see they've won 1 game out of 6 of these one-score games. And I'm seeing a lot of people saying, how are Gloucester so bad? And I watch them and still think they're quite a good rugby team, and they've probably just been a little bit unlucky. I think that shows it. So in this scenario, they'd jump up to being third if they'd won, although that would mean they'd won 83% of their one-score games, which probably isn't sustainable. And the biggest loser here is probably Bath, who've only lost 1 of their one-score games. It's essentially the exact opposite of what Gloucester have done. So they'd move way down the table. Although obviously that sort of comes with the same caveats as using just one-score games the other way, is that some teams massively overperform, some teams massively underperform. So I've also looked at what would happen if a team won exactly half of their one-score games. So we can see that here. And again, Bath would suffer, and Gloucester would do slightly better, because obviously they're still getting... Bath are still losing points and Gloucester are still gaining points, but it doesn't make as much of a difference to them. But interestingly enough, this table lines up very, very closely to the table of points difference. And I've put in Saracens as third. So obviously the positions look a bit weird because Saracens did some naughty things. But I think the top 8 are pretty much bang on. I guess if you swap Bath and Harlequins around in the points difference table, I think they're just sorted alphabetically there. But they've got the exact same points difference. And then you'd probably obviously drop Worcester down to the bottom. But, Leicester, London Irish and Worcester essentially have the same sort of points difference a game. So Worcester probably would be the only team doing noticeably better than they should be doing in this sort of metric. So I think that's just quite interesting and just for a bit of fun looking at. And perhaps painful viewing for me as a Bath fan, realising maybe we've been a bit lucky. But of course, we might not get to find out anytime soon, which is a bit of a shame. So thanks for looking at my very dodgy graphs that I've made. Hopefully they're mildly interesting, and you can enjoy that, and it's giving you something to think about. Obviously, there's a caveat that I've only sort of looked at 2.5 seasons of data, looking at the Gallagher Premiership, but there's enough there to I think drive some interesting discussion, and I would love to do it for Pro 14 and Super Rugby and things, but there's only so much a man can look at spreadsheets before going insane, and I'm someone who loves spreadsheets, so yeah, I think just take a little step back from them. But I hope that it's given you something to think about, and yeah, I'm sure plenty of people will disagree, and there's so many variables in this that it's just I think a very interesting starting point for a discussion.